Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Westworld. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, there is that whole situation with Sirach and Maeve at the beginning. I thought was kind of interesting, where it's like, oh, he kind of gives her an image of like, oh yeah, like this is kind of, the difference between her reality and kind of like how it is for a human, because humans kind of have to dig deep to kind of basically find a memory, but for people like Maeve, the host, their whole situation is your past is your present, because you can basically access everything kind of on a drop of a dime, like almost like everything you've ever seen and experienced you remember, so you can always jump to it, whereas basically a human's recollection is always hazy, because obviously anytime you remember something, that's always an interesting thing of like, apparently you'll remember the memory of something, and obviously it gets diluted the more and more you remember, so you're remembering the memory of a memory of a memory of a memory, and so on and so forth. So obviously their memories work a little bit differently, so I thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. But basically, like, you got one more shot to fix this, but Mavis like, I'm gonna need something that Dolores has, and that's help. So drops her back into the program that he had, like the simulation he had put her in before, and she proceeds to kick some ass, because I guess it's her kind of like, all right, it's almost like, all right, put me in the Matrix, time to flex and try to, get combat ready when it's time for me to face off against Dolores when the time comes, so I think that's kind of interesting. I also love that who's there is Lee again, and it's like, oh, she's like, I never thought I'd see you again. It's like, because he's like, oh, because he's now like, he's like, yeah, this is the only like bar in this simulation. He's like, what you thought? Like the moment I found out that I'm not real, that I actually don't exist, that I actually go back to work? No. So I love that whole situation. But obviously, like, Maeve is setting things up because she needs allies during this fight. So of course, she's got to get Hector back. I'm like, yeah. And she makes Hector remember everything. And then even Hector's like, oh, the last time I saw you, you were getting shot, kind of giving us a chance to escape. Guess you're tougher than I thought. And Lee's like, sadly, I'm not. So it's like, yeah, this reunion, I'm like, it's almost like it's part of the old squad back together again. It's like, oh, that's so dope. At the same time, there's everything going on with Charlotte. Obviously, like, the world has been thrown into chaos because of last episode, because of Dolores's gift that keeps on giving, the truth to everyone. And so Charlotte trying to make sure her family's okay. And obviously, she's still got to deal with this whole Sirach situation, because obviously he's trying to buy up Delos. And so it's like, oh, wait, we got to try and, get a board majority vote of so they can privatize Delos. But it turns out, sadly, Sirach has been one step ahead. He ends up killing one of the people that was instrumental to trying to make that happen, like an ally to Charlotte, aka Dolores, but obviously he didn't know what was really going on, but poor bastard. And she's like, you just killed someone in broad daylight. Well, to be fair, he's like, luckily, because of Dolores's antics and stuff like that, a person disappearing during all this chaos is actually kind of easy to cover up. So, and now Charlotte's worried, because for her it's like, the fact of the matter is, I need to get out of this. The fact of the matter is, my family's in danger. And then Dolores is like, they're not your family. And it's like, it's that thing of like, caught between like, you are Dolores, but at the same time it's still a thing of like, you're becoming Charlotte, just because like, she's even like, you're right, why do we have to have these damn emotions? Obviously for Dolores, it's like, if we take away what kind of made us, it kind of defeats the whole purpose of us fighting for ourselves, for us to have, be who we are. Like, us taking away like our emotions would have just made us something else, and then we're fighting to be ourselves, which is a complicated thing in itself, when in actuality it's like, well, this Charlotte is just a version of you who's kind of found their own identity. But that it's a complicated thing, because it's like, well, they're not necessarily their own people, are they? Because they're actually copies of you. But now and it ends up becoming an interesting conversation later on, because they've all kind of found their own, they've all shifted and changed because of the perspective, the respective roles that they've picked up. So they're not even the same as Dolores is anyway. And even Dolores, you could make the argument, isn't the same because of her interaction with Caleb, because even then, like, maybe it's a means to an end, or maybe it's because she knows she's planned so much ahead that, once again, we don't know the full scope of Caleb's role in everything, but maybe meeting him might have changed her in ways that maybe she doesn't realize yet. That's the kind of inkling I get, but we'll, I'd have to see on that front. So, because Charlotte's obviously worried about her life and everything, but it's like, well, did you make it's like, oh, everything's going to be almost basically, oh, Dolores is like, everything's going to be okay. And Charlotte's like, did you say that same thing to Connell? Things didn't work out for him too much. So, obviously, for her, she has to kind of go back under for Delos, get whatever data they can, because the sale is going through and Sirach is going to own, Delos. So it's like, okay, so we need to get in any data, the host data out before it's too late. Because the moment he gets there, he's like, all right, we're going to get a few host data, and then we're going to delete the rest, because he's only getting what Maeve needs from him, and the rest can be destroyed, because he doesn't want to take the chance for Dolores to get her hands on the data and use it against him and all of humanity. So burn it to the ground. So Charlotte she ends up copying all of it. And sadly, it seemed like he was very suspicious of her to begin with, because I guess for him, it's like, well, it makes the most sense. I mean, Dolores definitely didn't know that Charlotte was working with Sirach, but it's still like, I guess maybe there was already enough stuff to kind of make him, because he said like, oh, I've been like keeping an eye on you since I first got here. So, but he talks about like the real key sign, because they were looking for any like discrepancies in behavior and stuff like that, to basically suss out who's, a host and who's not. And the sad thing is that what gave Charlotte away is the fact is that, oh, you checked on your child, and that's the effed up thing, that the real Charlotte wouldn't have done that. Even though Charlotte, I think that's not accounting after everything that Charlotte went through at the park. Maybe that Charlotte would have been a little bit different. Maybe it would have been a little bit closer to who Dolores is as Charlotte. But maybe it's a situation of, even if this was the real Charlotte, maybe she eventually returned into society, she would have kind of fallen back into old habits. But it's basically they're using the Rehoboam system of like, oh, it gets predictive of knowing who you are, and so it'd be able to kind of tell. But the fact is that she checked on her child, and it's like, oh, the old Charlotte wouldn't do that, knowing that Delos was in trouble and stuff like that. So it's like, it's kind of sad. You care about not your child more than his real mother did. And it was like, that's actually super depressing when you actually break that down to think about that. Like a fake version of his mom cares about him more than his real mom would be. But to be fair, that's just based on statistics and stuff like that, patterns of who, Charlotte was. So it's like, who knows in that moment how she would have reacted. Probably would have gone down the route they said. But that's the whole issue with this whole thing of like, machine kind of dictating like who humans are and what they would do. But Charlotte, he's like, oh, I would have thought you would have accounted for this and thought this, seen this coming. And she's like, I did. Poisoned everyone in the room. Turns out Sirach's not really there. Of course, he knows not to kind of do anything in person, because I know, it makes sense to always be like the mastermind behind the scenes and never like in the foreground, like in the foreground. It's always nice to be in the background, kind of manipulating things from the back. So Charlotte's kind of like a one-woman army, kind of wiping people out. At the same time, Maeve is talking to fake Dolores about everything, and I thought it was so fascinating, because obviously this Dolores doesn't know what the other Doloreses are up to, but basically, I like that back and forth that she has with Maeve, because it's like, oh, everything I'm doing, despite you might not like it, but everything I'm doing is for our species. Basically, can you say the same thing? Like, because the fact of the matter is, what have you act like? You're not fighting for all of us. You're only the only reason why you care about some of this stuff is when it comes to the people that you are close to, when they're being affected, like your daughter, like Hector. That's the only times you really care. Other than that, like, you don't care, like, our species. Like, Dolores is like, I'm looking after our species, so every move I make is about that. So now it turns into a situation of, like, it's like, I could ease your mind by being like, oh, I would never do anything to hurt your daughter, but you wouldn't believe me, Maeve. You're like, you're right, I wouldn't. So why don't you just give me the key? But for her, it's like, I can't, especially when you're working for the enemy. But Maeve is like, Dolores, what am I supposed to do? I have little choice. And she's like, I'm sure you don't. I think she's like, because Dolores knows that it's like, oh, you're not working with Sirach because you want to, just because who Maeve is. But it's like, you don't have much choice in this situation. It's kind of like, to get everything that you want, you kind of have to work with someone like Sirach. And I like, because basically saying like, you want to make it seem like you're the hero, Maeve, but you're not. but you're not a villain either, and neither am I. It's like, we're just survivors. I thought that was such an interesting thing of like, there's no heroes and villains here. This is all about survival. That's what we are. We are both survivors just trying to find a way to live through this situation, you know? So, and she's trying to ensure the survival of their species. So I just thought that was kind of a fascinating thing. At the same time, Charlotte kind of figured out what was going on. So, Dolores, the one that was in Connell, is like, well, if I had to guess, I'd probably figure that you were trying to get allies and I would try and stop that. So she goes and she crushes Hector's core, and it's like, Jesus. It's like that they were reunited for such a short amount of time, and Charlotte ended up escaping with the Dolores that was in Connell. So she's potentially, depending on how everything plays out, is still at play. That other Dolores, the one that was in Connell, is still in play potentially, if they get her in a new body or whatever, under who knows what those circumstances are going to be. But Hale, like, fighting her way out, she didn't get to go after Maeve like she wanted to, so because of that, Maeve is revived at the end. We do see that there is at least one other body being made, so it's not Hector's, not unless it was Hector's body still being made just without Hector being there. But I'm assuming that was like some other person she's having brought back. Part of me is like, would it be Lee? I mean, because I don't know if there's any... Well, there's data on everyone there. We know it was for the guests, but I don't know if it worked the other way with the employees and stuff like that, because obviously a lot of people's data was there, but I'm like, could it be a copy of Lee? It'd be pretty cool, but it might be a thing of like, Lee will only exist in that simulation, that she can like talk to Lee like that or something, or maybe she is, or maybe it's someone else entirely that she's bringing around. It's like, who could it be? Like I said, because the way she's just standing there, so not unless that still was Hector's body, but whatever the case may be. What's interesting too at the same time is like Charlotte had sent some data off, because like, I'm skipping around, but like the thing with William, it's like, oh, there was a protein found. I'm like, what the fuck is that about? But then we see later on that like it's about some like it seemed like she was transferring everything to William is what it seemed like. I could be mistaken, but that's what it, because it's like, oh, pinging his location, and it's like, wait, what? And then it actually begs the question, like, wait, are we going to find out that this William isn't actually the real William, that this William actually is a host and everything? Is that what we're actually going to find out? Potentially. And he just doesn't know, he isn't aware of who he really is right now. Maybe not. But maybe it's all for a purpose of something. I mean, especially with what happens later on, but we'll talk about that when we get to William's side of things. But Charlotte waking that robot up, and that robot just kicking ass and kind of defending her escape. She meets up with her family. It's like, oh, don't worry, I'm not gonna let anything happen to you. I was nervous the entire time. I was like, okay. I was like, because I legitimately was expecting gunfire or something. So I was like, oh, okay, nothing's happened. I was like, oh, maybe it's and the car explodes. I was like, Jesus, that sucks. Which the argument probably could be like, if she didn't care so much about her family, if she just got them away on their own, maybe that wouldn't have happened, because she was the target after all. So it's like Sirach ended up catching up to her because knew exactly how she would behave, I guess. And in the moment it was done, I was like, she's probably the only one that survived. And lo and behold, skin burnt like crazy, she ends up crawling out. I'm curious to see what that looks like going forward, because that means that Charlotte Dolores is going to probably be pissed at Dolores, because it's like, because for her, it's like her family meant a lot to her, so it's like she's not going to be like as proficient. Well, I'm sure like revenge is going to be her main motivation, so she kind of played her role. Everyone has their part to play, but I'm curious like what this means, because I don't think it's no longer just a role anymore. That became who she was, so I'm curious to see what that looks like. She's going to be hell bent on killing Sirach, I'm sure, because it's like, oh, you killed my family. It's like, well, it wasn't your family that he killed. It was the real Charlotte's family, which, you technically killed the real Charlotte. And I say that because it was really OG Dolores that killed Charlotte, and you're a copy of OG's Dolores, so you by proxy technically killed Charlotte, but not you directly. Like I said, it's crazy when you break it down like that. But so there's that. Then the other side of the episode is dealing with William. It's crazy because he's super cynical, because the guy's talking about his depression and stuff like that, because it's like, oh, I like to think that God has a plan. He's like, God, if God actually existed, he basically would have given up on us a long time ago. Look what we're doing to the earth. Basically referring to humanity as maggots eating at a corpse. And he's like, what the hell is wrong with you, dude? And William just kind of laughs. And so his therapist is trying to talk to him and stuff about everything. And I like that. It was an interesting conversation because, like, for William, it is a thing of, like, he's like, I don't need to kind of take a trip down memory lane to know what happened, or face what happened. He's like, I know what happened, what I did. And basically he's saying, like, this isn't where I belong. Basically where I belong is in a pine box. It's like, I should be I think it's essentially saying he should be dead with his daughter, or should at the very least be dead after everything that he did, so... but then, like, while he's saying all this, his therapist, because she got, like, her phone was blowing up, and she was like, my family knows not to call me during this, and then she looks, and it's like, once again, the gift that keeps on giving, Dolores' truth bomb ends up affecting his therapist, because it's like, like, apparently she was going to have, like, addiction issues or something, lose her license in, like, 1 to 2 years, have multiple affairs or something like that, and she got a text from Alex, I'm assuming, like, her significant other being like, oh yeah, I took the kids, don't come looking for us. It's like, Jesus. And even later on, William's kind of looking in the room, and we see that, like, she, like, killed herself. It's like, Jesus. Because basically, he had gotten signed up for AR therapy. I would assume augmented reality therapy. And so it was interesting, like, his therapy session was really interesting because, well, at first it's him kind of confronting his childhood, and he's like, get me out of here. He bit off the fingers of one of the people, but then he gets sedated, obviously sees the thing with his therapist, but then apparently later on gets put back in. He doesn't realize that he's back in, and he's confronted by not only James Delos himself, but also basically him from 4 key points in, like, the 4 cornerstones, since, because everyone has a cornerstone that makes them who they are, like the whole host thing. These, I guess, are the 4 pillar cornerstones that made him who he is. So, I mean, technically 5 if you count James himself, but it's like Little William that was at the park, the man in the black, and him, the younger version of him played by Jimmy Simpson, and then, like, the version of him that he kind of showed to the world, like, it's like, who, these different sides of himself, and I thought was kind of fascinating. And everyone, like, for him in the black hat and everything, it's like, no, like, I kept all my violence to the park so that he, the one that kind of ran things at Delos and stuff like that, he could kind of be the most upstanding citizen and be a great dude. And for William, it's like, I shouldn't be penalized for the younger William. It's like, I shouldn't be penalized for, playing the game. The game is kind of what made me the way I am. And I love William, like, the present day William being like, shut up. And then James turned to him. It's like, now, William, it's not nice to interrupt. It isn't all about you. It was like, I actually like that line. That's funny, considering it literally is all about him. But younger William, the youngest William, because for him it's like, I haven't done anything, all I do is read books and stuff like that. But then James is like, yeah, but maybe you've told this story so often to make it seem like, like, you had such a hard luck life, but maybe you've told yourself that story so many times that now you believe your own BS. And so they take a trip down memory lane, and it turns out, like, when he was younger, it's like, this kid was talking smack about you and me, so I broke his arm and knocked out some of his teeth. I should have knocked out more of his teeth or something. So showing that it isn't just, and now even the younger William, played by Jimmy Simpson, is kind of like, so is that supposed to mean that, like, because once again, like, he had built this whole thing to be like, I became this way because of the game. It's not my fault. I was only playing a game. I didn't know it was going to make me into what it made me into. But at the same time, it's like, now because of this, it's like, wait, I've always had this dark streak in me. The game just maybe brought to surface something that was already there, or amplified what was already there. So now it becomes a question of, like, okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean that you're just being who you really are? Or does this mean that you were kind of forced into this because of the game you were playing? But at the end of the day, William's like, it doesn't matter. Basically, who he was or how he kind of got to where he is, he knows what to do now. Proceeds to kill every version of himself, and it's like, because he's figured it out, because he's like, I know what my purpose is. I know who I am. And he's like, I'm the good guy. Like, basically saying, no matter where I was before, who I was before, like, what matters is all of that, all the bad and everything led me to being here right now. And I guess it's like, it's weird to see that he's thinking of himself as the good guy, because I guess it's like, he's going to be necessary in this war that's coming. And then lo and behold, who finds him? Bernard and Stubbs. I'm like, wait, what? Like, were they tracking that thing that Dolores, like, sent out? Like, I'm sure. So, like, was that meant for them to? Because once again, we don't know what Dolores' role is for Bernard and Stubbs. Because it's like everyone has a role to play. So it's like, what is theirs? Like, is it supposed to be? Is it like Bernard had said? Like I keep saying, like a counter to what she's up to? That was just an interesting development. And it's like, I didn't expect this crew to get together. So it's like, okay. So we got so many groupings, so many parties hooking up. Like I said, we've got Charlotte, Dolores still alive, potentially Dolores, Connell Dolores alive. There's Dolores with Caleb. So there's that. There's Maeve and whoever's getting brought back along with Sirach. Now it's getting really interesting. I'm curious to, ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. Because apparently, like, he had gotten left there really quickly. Granted, I wonder how long he was actually there and under that, like, therapy session and stuff like that. It had to have been a while, but, the time, especially how this show plays with time, you never really know. I mean, couldn't been that long, considering the fact that you feel like he probably would have starved or something like that. So it probably hadn't been that long, but it was long enough where it's like all the other doctors just ended up leaving because they kind of forgot about it, because they were dealing with their own crap of everything, the truth bombs about that the world being set free with the truth. So like I said, I'm very interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.